we're happy to have a session today where we're going to focus primarily on just talking to smart people who have made it work in their lives. And that's not, I know that you guys have access, I realize that you have access to job panels and different stuff that goes on across the street. But this is a smaller setting, and this is kind of our family, our tribe. So I thought it would be cool for you to have access to people who were not just Maurer alums and lawyers who were maybe interesting, but also, these are our people, these are environmentalists, and if you want to know about that, Jeff and I also, we've made it work in our own ways, but we're a lot older and a lot stodgier than these nice people, so you might get more out of it talking to them. But really, we wanted this mostly to be a Q&A session. I'll be happy to do introductions and I'll be happy to MC the thing, but I would be very glad, as I mentioned in an email, I'd be very glad if you guys could turn this into a discussion. And I will help do that in any way I can, but we're just going to try to get them talking, and you can help with that. Well, I want to give a brief introduction. As I said yesterday in the email that I sent, Hannah is an attorney with the Conservation Law Center, has been with us since 2020. Hannah was a 2019 grad from Maurer, and both these folks have just extraordinary, for young lawyers, their resumes are just badass. And Hannah worked at the Southern Environmental Law Center. That's kind of in the national pantheon. You guys might disagree with it because you're both alums of SELC, but I would say, in my mind, in the national pantheon, Southern Environmental Law Center is kind of a step down. I don't mean in quality, I mean in terms of size, from Natural Resources Defense Council or Earth Justice. These are kind of like the big, massive ones. And then you've got what are more regional ones, Southern Environmental Law Center being one of those. This is a fair assessment, I'd say. Okay. But those are Jedis. Those people are real cool. And so she worked at Southern Environmental Law Center, as did Matt. Hannah also worked at NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council. Turns out she was Order of the Coif. I had to look up what that was. I actually didn't know. That means she's smart, top 10%, it turns out, at Maurer. After law school, she clerked for Judge Baker at the Indiana Court of Appeals, and then started with Conservation Law Center in 2020, as I said. She's working on a number of different projects with me and Jeff, Public Trust being one of them, and helping deal with some nonprofit management stuff lately. Matt was undergrad biology at University of Richmond. He was magna cum laude from Maurer in 2015, so he's a few years older. He also worked at SELC and also at the Environmental Law Group in Richmond. I assume that means you're from Richmond?
I just ended up going to school there.
Where are you from?
From Jersey.
Okay.
So I left.
We'll make jokes about that in a few minutes. And I'll tease it. After law school, he worked at a law firm, Holland Hart. Where was that?
It's in Denver. So
okay.
my 2L summer and then a year and a half there.
Okay. And he is now an associate senior. He's an EPA lawyer in Denver. I don't know what the actual title of that is off the top of my head. As an interesting side note, because Conservation Law Center brings people together, I learned this after the fact that he's married to a woman named Kayleen, and they met in Conservation Law Center when they were both interns with us during school. And she's also an attorney with the EPA in Denver. So they work together, they live together. But I will ask them to talk. Thank you very much, Jeff. I will ask them to tell you a bit about themselves, and the kind of questions that we want to get at is, or at least the things I would start with, like what path did you take and what was important to you, and we'll get at all what pieces of advice, what classes should you take. Those are all the pretty normal things that we can scratch at. But Hannah, did you always know you wanted to be an environmental lawyer?
Absolutely not. I actually have taken, it's not even a path of like how I've gotten here. It's just been kind of wandering until I landed somewhere. But so for undergrad, I actually started out, I was supposed to be a music major with like classical trumpet performance. And then a few weeks before school started, I decided I wanted to have somewhat of a life. So I dropped that and then just kind of did everything and ended up with a German major and a history major. Had no idea like what to do with that after grad school, so I took a couple years off and worked in restaurants, and just kind of tried to figure out like what I was good at, what I liked doing, and how I could be useful in a way that like felt good to me. And where those ended up intersecting was environmental law. So I came to law school like specifically for that like subject area, but not really knowing like what direction I wanted to go from there, like whether it would be nonprofit or government, or I even considered firms at some point. So yeah, and then I also came here because I have the joint degree from SPIA. I have my master's in public affairs, which I was familiar with that just by virtue of having gone here for undergrad. But my concentration in that was environmental policy and natural resource management, so it fit really nicely with everything else I was doing. So yeah, I guess I've done kind of everything before getting here, and I have absolutely no science background, so that was kind of an adjustment. Is I felt like the expectation in all my summer positions. Oh, I did do a summer at the EPA too, but in Philly, so that was my first summer position. But I've always had so many competing interests. Like between, it was initially music, and then I actually first was a fine arts major and did painting for my first half of college. And so trying to find a career path that felt like personally fulfilling, but also gave me the time and money to keep up all of my other interests was really important to me. And that's how I ended up here. So,
Why'd you go to law school?
like I said, I was just trying to figure out how I could be of use, because I was literally trying to choose between painting grad programs or law school, which are like, you can't compare the two, but I felt like, I don't know, like during undergrad, I did absolutely no extracurriculars, like didn't really do any like volunteer work or anything. Like I worked multiple part-time jobs all the time, but didn't feel like I had ever done anything for other people. And that was sort of like something that has always been important to me. And so I wanted to try and find something that could satisfy like that aspect of my interests. And then also, I mean, growing up, like I was constantly outside and like hiking and camping with my family. And so I knew I liked environmental stuff. I knew that it was urgent in terms of what's important in the world today. And so I was just trying to figure out, you know, what kind of program or career would like best suit my needs, and then also be able to like give back to others. So that's why.
And your mom's a lawyer?
Yeah, my whole family is attorneys, and so I never really, I mean, there's never pressure to like be them, and if anything, my mom tried to convince me to do like the opposite of what she did, because she also went to music school and then was a lawyer. But I quit music school long before she did, and we played different instruments, so that was fine. But she was a business, like corporate lawyer here in town, and then my uncle also was one. I don't know if you've heard of a firm around town called Clendening Johnson Moore. That's my uncle. My stepdad is a judge and a lawyer and a prosecutor. Like it's all over. But I don't think that actually had any impact on the path I ended up taking. So in a good way. So.
How about you? Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer, Matt?
Not at all. I wanted to be a search and rescue guy. So I was a climbing guide, outdoor guide, and then after too many rainy days in Alaska, sleeping in a tent, I was like, this sucks. I don't want to sleep in a tent anymore, but I like being, doing something environmental. What does that look like? Environmental law, right? So that's how I ended up coming here. And like Hannah, I came specifically for environmental law when I came to law school. Specifically also for this clinic. I love this place. I think you guys are a great place. In law school, I knew environmental law was the thing for me, and like Hannah, bounced around nonprofits, some government agencies, trying to find my way, and ended up in Denver because of an alum who was looking for a graduate to come out and take a job and do environmental work. So got some really neat exposure out there really quickly. It was the Obama administration, so a lot of rules were flying out that were really interesting to work on, not always on the right side of them, but substantively very engaging. And then I had a chance to jump to the EPA and took it as soon as I could.
What was your undergraduate?
Anything that got me outside, which went from all over the place, like a general undecided major, to, well, they won't let me go to med school, I want to study abroad, and they won't let me study abroad twice to be a vet, so screw it, I'm going to be a biologist. So that's how I got to biology. And I like biology.
But can I follow up on something?
I wish you would.
There was, in your chain of logic of how you got to law, there was something that was missing that I'd like to hear about. And so it's what do I want to do to do something environmental? And your next thing was, environmental law. But if you have a biology major, there's a million other things I could think of in science that would have gotten you actually out in the field.
Yeah. So I'd done field science, and I have some biases, not unlike Hannah, because my dad is a senior biologist, Fish and Wildlife Service, state biologist. And I'd done that, I'd been out in the field, I'd seen more than my fair share of waders, and I was like, this is still too close to the tent and the rain for me. I want to be out there when I want to be out there, but for a profession, it was more like, how to do good for the environment from a desk. And that's why law and policy was the path I ended up picking, rather than being a professional biologist.
Were you a double major?
I had like 3 at one point, but no. Ultimately landed on biology and chose not to do a joint degree here, only because I didn't know about it beforehand.
Yeah, it's really publicized.
And when I tried investigating it here, it just didn't work out.
Jeff, you mentioned when you introduced yourself last week that you went and got a PhD in ecology from the University of Tennessee before you went to law school. I'll ask you the same question. Why did you go to law school? I don't know why he's laughing. I'm looking
I'm
forward
laughing
to it.
because he knows the answer.
I can't remember. That's even better.
I was living in Oregon working at EPA, at the EPA lab in Corvallis, which is it's a research lab for EPA. It's not an enforcement lab. If there is such a thing as an enforcement lab. It's not the enforcement arm of EPA. It's the research arm. And was totally happy with that, but then I got married. And my wife was a professor at Earlham College in Indiana. So she was tenured. I gave up my job as an ecologist at EPA, moved to Indiana, which was a shock, I can tell you. I never thought I would go back east again because I was from Chicago. Never thought I would move back east. But love does strange things, if you don't know that already. And when I moved to Richmond, Indiana, if you know Indiana at all, who the hell wants a PhD ecologist in Richmond, Indiana? Nobody. So really, I went to law school really because I couldn't stay as a scientist where I was living. And I guess there's one more sentence to that, which makes it deeper than that. So I was sitting around with Leslie. Well, this is, since I can't find work as a scientist, this is a time to reevaluate what I want to do and make a contribution to the world. And she said, this is the way she tells it to everybody. She said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to sue the bastards.
He still says that.
And I was sitting for the LSAT within 2 weeks. It was that fast. It was so clear at that point.
That's good. That's good. What do you all want to know? I've got a list of questions, but I only wrote those as backups in case you all clammed up on me. So why don't I give the floor to you all? What do you want to know?
Matt,
Andrew?
Yeah, you said you transitioned as quickly as you could to the EPA. How did that work out? Was that a networking opportunity or?
So the EPA has summer internships for law students and a graduate opportunity called an honors attorney program in a lot of the regions and the headquarters offices. So EPA isn't just a monolith. There are 10 regions and half a dozen offices and headquarters. And the region in Denver is Region 8. And they had an opening for this honors attorney position, which is like the way to get like on the fast track to a full-time attorney job. So I actually paused and waited. I didn't apply the first time because my wife, Kayleen, had mentioned she applied for it and got it. Immediately was transitioned into a full-time attorney. Lucky for me, I got to apply and then I got the job at the start of the Trump administration. So it was a real gut check for, is it still worth it? And I think it was, and it is, and we can talk about what that's like working under different administrations. But yeah, you have to go through the whole USA Jobs government application process. But at the end of the day, I think EPA is great. I'm glad I did.
Isn't there, didn't you or Kayleen mention just the other day that there's a job? Isn't the honors program hiring right now somewhere?
There is. Region 6, I think it's Houston, is hiring. So if you know any grads who are barred, Houston would love to have them. Region 8 in Denver will be hiring in a month here to start in January. So especially if you know anyone who graduated early or who's been out for a year or so looking for a switch, any clerkships, Denver is hiring.
I have a question based on my own personal experience. I think when I was first looking for work out of law school, I put in a USA Jobs application and it just went into the total ether. Is it necessary to know somebody at the agency you're thinking of, or does that thing actually work sometimes?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. You don't need to know somebody, and no, it doesn't work well.
Okay.
So anyone who's applied for a federal job through USA Jobs, it's a bear trap. It's terrible. You have to self-rank yourself on all these different metrics that are applicable to your profession, and that goes to people who aren't actually reviewing you in an HR office, who don't know anything about the position except what's in a one-pager, and they say, we think, this half of the class is the best qualified. And then, as the one hiring, we only get to see these resumes. We don't get to look at anybody over here. So if you're applying for USA Jobs, I would say being self-confident in your self-evaluation is a great way to do it. And sometimes there are attorney positions that don't go through USA Jobs, but if you have to, work the system so you can get to the interview. That's my advice.
But would it be best to make personal contact with somebody at the agency you're thinking of?
It'll be great if you get to the interview stage, but we literally have no say in which resumes get passed on sometimes. Attorneys write their own rules, and there are some nuances there, but generally speaking, it's just the ones who come out of the office in Cincinnati that folks get to look at, and that's the pool.
Okay.
I'll go again.
Sure.
So Matt, you just mentioned this very briefly in a comment, but how jarring, and I'm only an admin law this year, so I have no perspective on this. How jarring is a new administration? I mean, you say when Trump came into office, there was a gut check, but how much of that actually affects you? Are you insulated by that a little bit, or?
So it depends where you are, right? So I think we may have had 3 different experiences from 3 different places. But being in the research arm, we were about to lose some labs. Like they were going to shut whole labs down because science was less of a priority, to put it mildly. You know, the closer you get to DC, and that's both in the chain of command, like if you're in a headquarters office, like the Office of General Counsel rather than Regional Counsel, or there's an enforcement office headquartered there. They have to deal with politicals, you know, dozens of them in their office every day who want to take their own path with the agency. And that impacts them on the ground. Whereas in the regions, we have a little more separation because the general ambits of the Clean Water Act don't change that much, right? If it's wet and it's water and it flows and you can row a boat on it in 1980 or 1890, like it's still navigable water, you can take an enforcement case. And we had one political in the region with like one handyman that came with them. So it's a little separated. They're kind of like, they bit around the edges about what we could do, but in the regions it wasn't as bad as you might think.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what your experience was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I actually, when I was in the regional office in Philly, which is Region 3, it was summer 2016, so everybody was sort of like nervous or just questioning what might happen with the election, but I ended up like sitting down with my supervisors at one point just because I think at the time at least Philly was like the oldest, like most senior of all of the regions for the attorney, like counsel part of it at least, because people had just been there forever. Like some people had been there since the region was formed. And I guess Philly isn't like a hot place that younger people want to move to. Like I don't think they have the honors program there, but most of the other regions do. But it meant that I got to talk to a lot of people about how it works, like when there is a very sudden, hard to ignore like political shift and change of administration. And they said really like, especially when you're just doing like enforcement work and a lot of your job day to day is the same regardless, like the laws don't change very fast. Government doesn't move very fast. In fact, it moves very slow sometimes. And a lot of times the issue will be like funding, like closing labs, or like I worked, the particular branch or like media area that I worked under was like toxics and pesticides, that kind of stuff. And it was like the most underfunded part of that regional office, and so they were worried that they would be totally underfunded by the time the administration changed. So that's something, but I think day to day, like things stay pretty consistent was my understanding.
Republican administrations of old could also be like a tough on crime mentality. So enforcement has actually gone down under some Democratic administrations. It's not necessarily the last decade, but it's not always like, you know, Democrats good, Republicans bad when it comes to protecting the environment. It gets a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
All of the great environmental laws in history were signed, not all of them. Most of them were signed by Richard Nixon, actually. NEPA, which was written by a university professor here at IU, believe it or not, Linton Keith Caldwell, if you've ever heard that name. He's one of the several founders of SPIA, or O'Neill now, across the way. And Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, I think those were all Nixon legislation, yeah, the 70s legislation. Endangered Species Act might have been Nixon.
3?
Yeah.
Have you quit yet?
I don't know, I want to say ESA was Nixon too. I'd have to look that up, but yeah, that's a really important point to make, I think. The Democrats don't get to claim to be good guys on the environment at the expense of the Republicans. That's not how that works.
And like the people you work with, like they don't like just fellow attorneys aren't going to change just because the administration does, and like your work is still just enforcing the laws that do exist. And there's a law that prevents you from talking about politics and stuff in the office anyway, so that helps.
How would you all contrast that? You're just talking about your experience with the EPA and the government generally. How would you contrast that experience with your nonprofit lawyering experiences? What are the big differences?
I can start. Since it was my summer, it was, I'm sure, different than what you've experienced, but I thought it was honestly like the perfect starting point, like for a first job, because or starting with the EPA, I mean, because you just familiarize yourself with the actual laws and like how they're enforced, what the regulations are versus the statutes, that kind of thing. And you can take your time because, like I said, government moves pretty slow. They also are fully aware that since they don't pay you, there's only so much they can do in terms of like overloading you with work. But it was nice because it meant I could do as much or as little as I saw fit, just based off of, you know, my abilities to like process the information and figure out my way. So that was great. And then going into my next summer, which was the SELC office in Chapel Hill, I was torn between going to a firm because everybody, like, I was with 2Ls. I did 4 years, so I was sort of not technically 2L, but also was, and that's when everyone does the, what are they, the on-campus interview things for firms. And I did a bunch of those just for practice, but it was pretty clear that the nonprofit route was the way I wanted to go. And once I was there, it's faster paced, and you actually get to like have an opinion on saving the environment. Like, it's not neutral, you're not just enforcing it, like you're doing the work to protect, like advocating and like really being aggressive with like policymakers. Like, we did a lot of lobbying the summer I was there because it was in North Carolina, the legislature meets every 2 years, and that happened to be the year that they were meeting, so that was kind of cool. It was a lot more just like on the ground. Like, I got to go out in the field and look at, you know, this new method for like wetlands banking that they were testing out, and I actually got to go like stand in a creek and help the scientist guys. I don't even know what they were, but like see more, do more hands-on work and help with like some grassroots organizing and advocacy and stuff like that. So it's just it's a very different kind of work. Like, it's all environmental and you're all doing good stuff, whether you're government or nonprofit or whatever else, but it was much more in line with the reason I came to law school. So I think that was the big difference for me.
You got to sue the bastards.
I did.
Can you tell me, not too long ago, you told me that, or no, I was talking to somebody else, and I remember an experience I was talking to Megan Fratelletti, who's a B710 student and was a former member of the clinic, and she told me over the summer she went to, I think it was Denver. I think she met with Kayleen to have coffee one time, and she was working on wild horses on public lands, which is a fascinating topic, actually. It just raises all sorts of ethical issues, and like, what does it mean to be a native? They're not native species, but how long do you have to live on a landscape to be sort of treated like a native species? And how does the government have a relationship with semi-native species on public land? And how do you, just balancing of those interests is really interesting. It's a neat thing to be able to work on. And she said that she sued the Attorney General of the United States of America, like as a law student. And I remember I sued Janet Reno when I was at wasn't Earth Justice then, but back in the day, I sued Janet Reno. That felt like, now I'm getting somewhere. You guys even know who Janet Reno is, maybe not. She was Attorney General. That was cool though. Anyway, what do you think? Go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing that I think is an important difference and that's something I experience here too, and that I really like about the work here is it's not all going to be like strictly legal, in the sense that like a lot of, especially at SELC, the division I was working in was like transportation, which is something that really interests me. And so some of the times, like if there was a proposed highway project, like yes, ultimately we were going to sue like Army Corps or someone related to that, but some of the work I got to do was like making the maps and figuring out like the proposed alternative routes that these highways would take, or marking up like which properties we would have to do like takings issues with if they built this road through there. Or again, like getting to go out in the field and figure out these new like wetlands banking credits and how they were going to calculate those. And then the big project I ended up working on for the summer was collaborating with and contacting like city planners and city managers across the whole state in figuring out like how to improve like public transit access, whether it was like just better designed streets and like bus stops that have, you know, shelters over them and lights so that people aren't just like standing out in the middle of the road, or like bike lanes, greenways, you know, rail to trail situations. So not legal at all, but still really important work that nobody else would have stepped in to do had our organization not been the person like coordinating all that, which is something we do a lot here. So.
Yep, we mentioned that last week, that I consider environmental lawyers to be problem solvers first and foremost. I'd say only, I don't know, Jeff, what would you say? 25 to 35% of our work is Westlaw work, and the rest of it is figuring out how to push the ball forward. Sometimes it feels like pushing the boulder up a hill like Sisyphus, but yeah, we're problem solvers. We do all sorts of things to save the environment. What do you have any thoughts on, Matt? Do you have any thoughts on like government, nonprofit splits?
Firm too.
Fair enough. Good point.
I do, and I think it's a three-part Venn diagram, and some of what I'll say echoes.
You have a whiteboard if you need it.
I hurt their eyeballs. My handwriting is bad. So firms, things firms and nonprofits have in common. You are trying to influence decision makers, whether it's writing policy, whether it's suing after the fact, whether it's arguing about a permit that should or shouldn't be issued, what a standard should be, like a water quality standard. You are making an argument to convince someone else. And other things that you have to balance are, firms obviously have clients who generally are trying to make a business case and make a profit, right? Sometimes you're beholden to what the Exxon CEO says you can or can't argue in court, even if you think it's a dumb idea. That happens. No one's going to pretend like firms don't make black hat arguments sometimes. Sometimes nonprofits also have to advocate for the greenest of the green and ask for 100%, even just to get 50%. So you have to keep that in mind too. But one place it's a little different is if you work in a law firm, you will get to, like nonprofits, you'll see all the ways government did it wrong, and we're good at that. We're good at getting it wrong sometimes. But you will see ways that regulations could be more clear, that implementation could be better, and you'll see how it directly impacts like a regulated community a lot, because they're the ones coming to you asking the questions because they don't understand what's going on. And that helps influence, at least helps me influence permit writers, rulemakers on the inside. Now, I'm at EPA making decisions, or at least counseling decision makers on how we should, or at least could act. And I'd like to make a distinction there, because my job, like if Jeff and I were in the same office and I'm counseling Jeff as a PhD scientist, I don't really make the decision. Jeff is the decision maker. 90% of EPA is scientists, 10% attorneys or others. Attorneys don't. We can tell them what the parameters are. This is the sandbox you can play in, and what we do is often a policy decision in there, influenced by science and the administration, and the actual making of the decision is normally different managers or case team leads that have the science background to say, this is what I think is best for this case, or this rule, or this region. So making the decision is really neat. You have to be in the room where it happened, right? To quote Hamilton, if anyone's a nerd like I am about that. Which is different than being on the outside and arguing about it. You get to try to do some good, have enforcement discretion. Right? Like there are plenty of cases, whether it's suing ranchers in Montana who don't understand Clean Water Act 404 problems, or small businesses where it's like, ooh, they really didn't understand it. It's a pandemic right now. We don't need to be a jackboot. Like you get to have that discretion, whereas on the outside, you're arguing for it. Either you should go hard on these people if you're the NGO, or you should go easy on my client if you're at the firm. But you also have the discretion to say, oil company, you spilled 1 billion gallons here or there. We're going to sue the hell out of you, and you can sue the bastards. And it feels really good to come in with a stat max penalty ask, and it's top of the line. I think we actually had an IU alum, a SPIA alum, who helped manage the Deepwater Horizon case, and that's really cool. Like you get to do that too, and really just go after the biggest number when you think it really warrants it. But you do have that discretion as the decision maker, which is not right in front of you if you're arguing for a firm client or for an NGO.
What a great point. I gave some advice to a client last week, and it happens so rarely, I feel like, where your lawyer gives you advice and your answer to that is, nope, that's not what I'm gonna do. And that's fine, that is up to them. I have to have thick enough skin. I mean, I want them to understand the risks of making this decision or that decision. And that's what Matt says, like drawing the boundaries of the sandbox. But it's up to them. You provide counsel. You're counselors, right? Why did you guys go to law school? Are you guys, I'm gonna turn the forum this way for a couple seconds. Are we gonna go to law firms? I think I mentioned this last week, it's okay not to know yet, for sure. That's definitely a fair answer. But do you have a vision of what the next 10 years looks like? Are you interested in going to nonprofits or law firms or government? Connor. The Connors. The Connors.
Yeah, we should have split up.
Pick a Connor.
I'll go. Yeah, I think in like a general sense, I went to law school because I do want to be in a position where, I can counsel someone and take some sort of issue that's really complicated or seems, a little too intricate or boring for someone to deal with themselves, and to learn that and then take it to them and kind of translate it and help them out. I don't think I want to work in a big firm. I did OCIs, and those guys don't seem like my vibes. So maybe a nonprofit or government work, but I'm still switching my interests seemingly every other week.
That's fair. We'll do the other Connor.
Very similar answer. If I was to work for a firm, it would probably be like a legal services situation, which is what I did over the summer. But yeah, my interests have only gotten broader because everything is interesting. So,
that's fair.
Great question.
That is a wide open answer. I don't want to always turn this back to me. I just have a lot of funny memories as we talk about this stuff because I haven't thought about it in a long time. I decided that working for a big firm, and I know I'm not denigrating that. That is a perfectly legitimate way to go. It wasn't for me. That's what I decided. And I only decided that after interviewing with a number of pretty big firms, one of which was in Chicago. I will leave it nameless. But it was on a very tall, in an upper floor of a very tall building. And I knew it wasn't gonna, I think I just probably had a bad experience because I'm sure there's a lot of cool, interesting people that work at these places. But this particular fellow, before we started the interview, said, Abby, look out the window at the Chicago Harbor and say, you see that boat down there, the blue one? Yep, that's mine. Yeah, that was cool. Cool story, bro. Anyway, plus I was just horny like Jeff. I just wanted to sue the bastards, actually. So, yeah, there you go. Anybody else? Do you have any? Zoe, I know you want to be an environmentalist. You have thoughts on this?
Yes. About my life path or what I want to do?
Well, I think you do. I mean,
yeah.
Zoe was an intern with us this summer, so we've had a few conversations about stuff.
Yeah, I think I eventually want to end up working for an earth justice type organization. I am shooting for a firm job this summer just to test it out, but I have also gotten bad vibes from the interviews I've been in, just sort of like, I think it's good to get a sense of environmental defense, but I think why I want to do environmental law doesn't necessarily align with a lot of the big corporate defense sort of things that it seems a lot of the firms are doing. But I did have a, what's the word? Sort of lighthearted, or that's not the right word. I had a good interview recently where it seemed like the firm was sort of trying to get into more like alternative energy stuff. So that was optimistic, I guess is the word I was looking for. So I tried to find firms that aligned more with my values, but I think working for a firm is not a long-term goal of mine.
Yeah, that's fair. Those are all fair. To provide a counterpoint, just to make sure that we don't paint the big firms as always bad guys, because that's certainly not accurate. One of the people that I thought was one of the baddest ass lawyers I ever met in my life, and I've learned a ton from him. When I worked at Earth Justice, he came from a huge firm, I can't remember which one, a huge firm in Atlanta, and went and worked at the Earth Justice office. Again, it was Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund back in the day. But he did endangered species. I learned how to do endangered species litigation with him, working on red-cocketed woodpeckers and burrowing tortoises. His name is Eric Huber. He is an attorney at the Sierra Club in Denver. I don't know if you ever come across that name, but he probably sues you guys probably.
Last administration, I think they brought us cookies.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. He is an absolute stud, and he went and cut his teeth at a big law firm to learn how to do it. I think that's one of the ways that people can go.
I would say most of the higher up or just, staff to senior attorneys at the, both, I guess, even the EPA and SCLC and NRDC came from working at a firm either for a really long time or at least, first couple of years getting that sort of boot camp associate level training, which can be really valuable. Also, money is a huge factor, and it's important. It's very important that you don't, if that's an issue for you, do what you have to do, and that's okay. It doesn't count against you.
I want to echo that dirty little secret that's not so secret. People from the firms are the ones who get appointed by Democratic and Republican administrations to be solicitors for the DOI, to be senior officials in the EPA. They go to NOAA, they go to NIMS. It is very common. They pull from industry and firms and also from nonprofits. But like Hannah said, a lot of those nonprofit folks, if you look at their pedigree, involve all the time in firms. The majority of my bosses went to law firms first and then got out. And I got out as soon as I paid off my house and paid for my wedding. I'm not gonna lie, we did some really cool work. We had the Clean Water Rule in-house, we had the Clean Power Plan SCOTUS brief in-house. Really neat stuff. Total black hat work, that sucked. We were arguing the wrong side of the ESA for cases in Alaska. But firms also give you the finances to do really cool pro bono work. If folks have, side hobbies, like I did precedent-setting LGBT rights litigation supported by a law firm, and only could do that because we had the funds and the backing to say, yeah, land illegal, let's go make some precedent in the 10th Circuit. And it was a first case in the nation to find LGBT discrimination is illegal under the Fair Housing Act. I can't do that at EPA. I can't sue the government. There are good things and there are bad things, but the big picture in the industry, and I'd say the bar, is that it's a bit of a revolving door.
Did you know going into the firm that you were going to leave after a certain period of time?
Yes. I went to the firm as an anchor so that my wife and I could get out there. And Jeff knew Kaylee. We both were very happy to work with in the clinic. But yeah, it was the way we got out and found a job together, somewhere to work together. And then she made the jump out to the clerkship, and I made the jump 2 months later. So it was a tool that also was good for a career.
You're one of the only people I've met, and that's a very interesting thing to hear. You're one of the only people I've met. I've heard many people in my life, in my own social circles, and just people I've come across in life who have said that what you do is so neat for a living. I'll do that, but first I want to go make some money and pay off my student loans. That's a pretty common sentiment, right? I'll do good work later. And I've just hardly ever met anybody that's pulled it off. Good on you. Most people get the golden handcuff scenario, right? Where you get a mortgage, you get a kid, you get a mortgage, you get a car payment, and you can't really see yourself taking a pay cut when you have that scenario sometimes. You've grown into a certain lifestyle that requires you to make $250,000 a year, and the idea of going to work for a nonprofit for $120,000 a year doesn't seem like a good decision for you or for your family. So the finances is another one of those very real things that it's impossible to judge people based on that stuff because life's hard, man.
Any guess what a GS11 starting attorney makes at EPA?
Depends on where you live. Oh, good answer.
It's true. It's true. About 60 grand. So you're not scraping the bottom, but you're not doing a whole lot of denting those student loans. And you bump up somewhat quickly, but most second-year law firm people make more than the most senior attorney in our region. So just context about priorities, what's important, what you want to do.
Do all EPA attorneys start out at 11?
If you start young and come through the honors program, yeah, 11, next year's 12, 13, and then you plateau at 14. But yeah, there's no big pay raise at the end of the year. You get the cost of living adjustment if the administration wants to give it to you, and a step if you've put the time in. But I am at the max I will ever be on my career trajectory unless I change jobs. As a sixth year? Yeah, 4 years into the agency, you are a GS-14, and you just kind of slowly ride that up to the top of that ladder, and that's it. So just something to be aware of.
Good context for you all to have, I think. I think another just sort of data point for you to put in your minds. I mean, some of it's geography too. Like, where do you want to live? Do you want to live in Bloomington, Indiana? Do you want to live in Denver? Do you want to live in Philly? Where do you want to live? I've been a lawyer. I've not been a law firm lawyer, but my wife has been a law firm lawyer in Bloomington, Indiana for 20-something years. And she does better now because she went out on her own and started her own law firm. But I will tell you, just from being a lawyer in this town and knowing every lawyer in this town forever, most lawyers in this town don't make 100. I mean, I would say most lawyers in this town probably, this is not actual data. I'm calling it data. It's experiential data. I want to put a caveat next to it, a little asterisk. It's been my experience in talking to people. Most lawyers in this town probably make between 70 and 100. Now I also know a law student that I worked with on the admissions committee last year who went to a big law firm in DC. Her first job was making $190,000. That's her first job out of law school. Now, cost of living, $190,000 is still a lot. So, but do you want to live in a big city? Do you want to work for a big firm? Do you want to work, how many hours a week is enough? Do you want to work 100 hours a week? And what was your experience working for a big law firm? How long did you have to, did they murder you?
I would look at the billable hours wherever you're interviewing for, because we had 1,800. There was 100 administrative hours, 200 you had to fill through volunteering, which is still great. Paid time, pro bono work, whatever. Or I was doing rescue work in the mountains, but 2,100 hours a year. That's like actually billing over 40 hours a week, which means you're working 50 plus. And that's not to say that if you go to a nonprofit, you're not going to work as hard for a different pay, but you still have to work for it, and that wasn't worth it for me. I love having a union job. If anyone ever wants to talk labor law, go union. But that's one big difference about coming to the EPA. I literally am not allowed to have a work phone. I can't do anything on my private phone, or else I get into Hillary issues, and it's a big problem.
How many hours do you work a week?
I work 80 hours every 2 weeks, so I take every other Friday off. I have a compressed schedule.
So you can't work overtime?
Every hour I work overtime, I get 1 hour of paid time off. And that is way different than a law firm where you just throw it into the bank and hope they give you a bonus.
See, does everybody realize that 40 hours of billed work, when you're first starting out and you're just playing around on Westlaw getting, what the hell is this particular subject you've never had in law school? You can't bill that. So 40 hours of billed work is a huge amount of time beyond 40.
Or a 40-hour work week includes going to the bathroom, talking to people, walking around, doing literally anything but work can be in that, but when you're actually having to bill it, it's a very different story.
Totally.
They don't pay you. You can't bill learning the subject. That is not billable. So you might end up working 80 hours to bill 40. That's it.
And it's stressful. I'm not gonna lie, I was the only one in my cohort that made their hours the first year because it was a downturn, and mining companies were going bust, and there was not enough work to go around. I worked at 3 different offices in the Rocky Mountains just to make like 1,800 hours. But if you don't, like, that's a serious professional stress. If you're hunting for work, because you're not relaxing and skiing, you're out there hunting for clients or looking for partners who have clients, which is a lot different than button chair time. You know, you clock in 8 to 5 every day, and that's it.
Are we scaring you well enough yet?
Dave does a great job.
You're gonna work your asses off and not get paid very well. Does that feel right?
I mean, I think it's just like important to be very familiar with yourself and like how you function and when you function highly and when you don't function very well. Like for me personally, I had nothing against like the options of firms, and I got a few offers for that 2L summer. And was thinking about, you know, long term if I wanted to maintain connections with these people and maybe try to get a full-time associate position after school. And after a couple years into law school, like I just very quickly realized that like the amount I was overexerting like during school alone, like I was not going to be able to sustain that after graduating, and I didn't. Like I started studying for the bar a month late because I needed me time, which I felt like I hadn't had in 4 years, and I knew that if I had gone to a firm, the risk of never getting that was higher. And granted, like not every firm is the same, but I knew that I needed like a hard cutoff at the end of the day, at least for the first year, like go home and not think about anything law related if I didn't want to. And so I like had to balance, you know, finances with that, which is part of why I stayed in Indiana, because I can afford to live for less here. And I wanted to stay here long term anyways, just because I care about it, environmentally speaking. But yeah, like just, it's okay to like take a step back and like really evaluate like what's important to you and what you need and all that kind of thing.
Because I think people in Earth Justice in DC, where I did an internship, they worked 70 hours a week. But, you know, yeah, maybe I do too. I don't know. At some points in this job, I did.
Hannah works 100 hours a week.
Really?
Yeah, every week.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out if there are even 100 hours in the week. But to me, let me just add my personal view on that. If you're doing what you love and what it aligns with your soul, then I think you can work 80 hours a week. But just imagine working 80 hours a week and your soul just like shrinks down to nothing. That's what's scary. Yeah, so when I listen to firms say 100, 1,800 and things like that, that scares the hell out of me. But if Christian were to say, keep your time, I'd like 100,000, 1,800 hours from you, I'd say gladly, because I love to do it. So it makes a big difference. What you just said, Hannah, is what are your, where is your soul? What do you want to be doing with your life? Some people are very good at working at firms, very good at it, and others aren't.
Well, and to tie back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of like why I went to law school, is like I had so many different interests, and so towards the end of school, I realized part of why I felt so like burnt out and run down wasn't because I don't love doing like environmental legal work, because I do, like I'm very passionate about it, but it was because I had squeezed out all remaining time for anything else, and those things were very important to me. And so as soon as I was able to do stuff like that again, like I draw all the time, I like run all the time, I can actually spend time visiting friends who don't live here, and not feel guilty about it, and that was the signal to me that I couldn't do something like that, like a more consuming firm job. But it meant that when there was work to be done like here that I do really care about, there is that time, and I still have time for everything else I want to do intermittently, and it fluctuates. Like when we've been doing litigation, like there will be a couple months where things are a lot crazier, and that's fine as long as I have time, on either end of that to do everything else that I care about. So that's been a huge thing for me post law school, is finding that balance.
Anybody else have any questions? We can just keep rolling if you like. Here's a question that I have for the group. Do you have any experiences? I would throw it open to the whole group, but the panel here. Do you have any experiences that stand out to you, either jobs or just personal experiences stand out to you as having been particularly important in the evolution of your career, such as it is early in the career? I'll give you an example of my own. When I worked after my first year of law school, I didn't do lawyering. I went and did grassroots organizing in northern Wyoming on, I think I mentioned this the other day, fracking before there was such thing as fracking, oil and gas development in northern Wyoming. And I lived with a cattle rancher, and I was a vegetarian at the time. And I got to know that, what I learned was how to talk to people that didn't always agree with me on everything, and cattle ranchers cared mostly about the same things that I cared about, even though we disagreed on some things pretty seriously. And just the ability to talk to people and find common ground and find the overlaps in the Venn diagrams that we all draw around ourselves. And I met a 90-year-old man who could tell me about the time before cars. And I just remember that was meaningful to me. It kind of helped steer my life. Learning how to talk to people who are different than me. Do you guys, does anything come to mind? Jeff, you included, or anybody in the group?
I guess I have a similar experience in terms of that, where right before law school, I used to live in New York, and then I knew I wanted to move back home to Indiana before starting school. And so the only job I could find was work in construction. And I hadn't worked in it before, but I just knew a guy who had a company, and he just needed bodies. And so, it was an interesting experience talking with people who were, not college educated, but kind of blue collar educated, and seeing the different kinds of intelligence out there that I just never really knew about, listening to, a guy wax poetic about HVAC systems for an hour. It's there's so much knowledge out there, and there's so many different kinds of smart that are all important, and that people might not think about as much.
Great answer. Love it.
Yeah, I would just add, similarly, I think some of the experiences that actually best prepared me for anything I do now is all the restaurant and service industry work I've done. I am a much different person in terms of being able to adapt to social situations and pick up on what other people's needs are when they're not communicating them very well. If the customer is screaming at you about something, you have to sort of figure out what they actually want. That is so helpful. And so if you have anything like that in your past, brag about those skills. I talk about restaurant work in every job interview I had just because it was important. And the farther along you get, a lot of people don't actually have that. A lot of my peers in law school had never worked, behind a counter somewhere. And so it's important. And, it's not something to shy away from if you have stuff like that in your background.
I learned that lesson the hard way in an environmental law class here. One of the teachers made us do a mock interview where we were acting like we were EPA inspectors or attorneys going to a plant regulated under the Clean Air Act or something like that. We had to ask this guy a bunch of questions, kind of prep for a deposition. And Jim Barnes was wearing an Aggies hat. It was his favorite football team from Texas. And if you went in, suit and tie, and just started badgering, where were you on this day? What is this component? Do you know it's regulated? You just went down the attorney track. He stonewalled you. He kicked my ass. But if you went in and you built a relationship with him and had people skills, and say, oh, hey, what's the Aggies? Oh, hey, is that a Don Quixote statue on your desk? If you built a relationship and a rapport with someone and got them to open up, you could figure out what was actually going on with the plant because they talked to you. You could figure out that there was an interest-based solution that you could negotiate where both parties kind of won. And that's a life lesson, that just because you're in a legal conflict with someone or in an office conflict with someone doesn't make them your enemy. Right? You can still find ways often to win-win. If you think about 99% of the cases that you're going to work on in your life are not going to go to be decided by a court. They're going to get settled. You get settlements by working with opposing counsel, and those relationships matter. So I would just echo everything that these folks said about those people skills being very important to complement your legal skills.
Like, watch Erin Brockovich. That part of that movie is very real, like in her ability to just go talk to anyone.
I would add to that another small piece that you've all been pretty quiet today, and I'm going to chalk that up to the fact that we don't know each other very well yet. We've just started working together, and that's totally fair. But I'll tell you what, chase it. If you want to be it, go make it happen, because you're going to get pressured from a lot of people just to like get in line and do it the way everybody else has done it. I'm talking about if you wanted to go be an environmental lawyer. I've taken my track. If you wanted to do something that you worked in environmental law and did conservation work, just for example, or nonprofit work, you got to make that happen on your own. All of your peers are going to go, they're going to go a different direction, and there's going to be some, even if they're not trying to pressure you, there's just sort of a herd mentality, like this is what we do, this is what law students do, this is how we go that direction, and we get that job, and we dress like this, and we work on these things. And if you want to break out of that track, you got to do it. It's up to you, because the school will provide you with resources, but only if you ask for them, only if you chase them down. Like, nobody's in charge of your destiny other than you. So I really encourage you to be your own advocates. And when you have opportunities to talk to people like us, we're resources for you. We'll tell you everything. We also, sometimes possibly it might seem like we're long-winded, but so you get what you pay for, but chase it. I think, as I mentioned, Megan Frevaletti, who's one of your fellow students, when she was out in Denver, she took it on herself to go meet with Kayleen and just to say hello and make a connection. And not knowing exactly how that's going to play out, might not do anything for her, but boy, oh boy, pat on the back for that. You got to go chase it your own self. I really encourage that.
Kayleen remembered. I was going to say hi to her.
She's in Budapest, so that would be difficult. But yeah, that's something that I would encourage.